Greetings, Taco Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Vikings episode review right here on Otaku Assemble Weekly. And as always, here to bring you the latest in this week's Vikings episode review. And this is my review of Season 2, Episode 7, entitled Blood Eagle. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode. Despite it being a good episode overall, I couldn't help but feel a tad bit disappointed with the ending. That's due in a majority to the preview for this week's episode at the end of last week's episode. History Channel stated that this week's episode was going to have one of the most shocking moments in television history, which, for any of you all who have seen my review last week, found that kind of hard to believe. Because I watch so much television, and because of the things that I've seen in the last couple of years, very little shocks me anymore. I find myself becoming very desensitized to a lot of the material on television now. The only thing that really surprises me is what networks can get away with, given their status, whether it's a network television like ABC, Fox, NBC, CBS, whether it's cable like History Channel or A&E or what have you, FX, and with premium television they can pretty much do whatever they like. So there, it's just a matter of what they decide to show you. My point being this: given that it's the History Channel, I kind of already sort of expected not to see anything out of the box necessarily. And when they said shocking moment, the only thing that I could really think of was, okay, they're going to kill Ragnar. You remember I mentioned last week's review, what are they going to do? Kill off their male lead? We've been there before. We've done that. We've treaded that water before. But, so yeah, I was just expecting them to kill off Ragnar. And what they did do a good job at is creating that little red herring, because throughout the episode there are numerous things that occur that make you think that's where the episode's going to end. But it didn't happen. It never happened, and I was waiting for it too, counting down the minutes, waiting for the axe to fall, waiting for the knife in the back or the sword in the side. I was waiting for it. Never happened. Now, don't get me wrong, the Blood Eagle execution, gruesome, grotesque, definitely some medieval shit, but seeing as how we knew what was going to occur as far as how the execution was going to be conducted beforehand, and the fact that they don't really show much of the actual execution itself, of the killing itself, not that shocking. So once again, like I said, good episode overall, especially with what we saw over in England, what we saw with the internal conflicts amongst the Vikings, and then with the execution scene itself. Good episode overall, tad bit disappointed. And that could very well just mean that my expectations were too high. I do not deny that fact. Maybe I was expecting too much. But anywho, so now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deeper into the review. First thing I want to talk about is what was going on in England in this week's episode. We saw the alliance form between King Ecbert and King Aelle. I'm just going to call him Aelle because I've never been able to properly pronounce his name. We'll just call him King Aelle. How about that? So this week's episode, we saw the alliance between those two, and learned what was King Ecbert's end. What was his plan? What was his point in forming that alliance? We learned that apparently there's a neighboring country that has a lot of infighting amongst themselves. And so rather than, allow that to continue, and rather than allow that to spill over into any one of the individual kingdoms, Ecbert and Aelle are pretty much just going to join up and conduct damage control. They're going to take that thing over, divide it up amongst themselves, and put it to bed. Which, that sort of thing happens all the time. Now, what I'll be interested in seeing where this thing goes is how they decide to deal with the Vikings. Because here's the thing. we already know. Okay, first off, we know that Ragnar, Horik, they're planning on going back to Wessex. If nothing else, Ragnar wants to find out what happened to Ethelstan. If nothing else, that's one of his major priorities. So we know they will be returning. But here's the thing. On the one hand, Ecbert wanted to negotiate with Ragnar. He wanted to utilize Ragnar for some purpose, which we never learned what it was. On the other hand, we know that due to the events in season 1, King Aelle, he's sworn revenge on Ragnar. He wants Ragnar's head on a platter, and nothing less will satisfy him. So it'll be real interesting to see how that conflict of interest plays into that alliance. Or who knows, maybe Ecbert is completely playing Ragnar for a fool. Maybe he is setting up this, gravitas scheme to sort of get Ragnar within his midst and then take him out, laying a trap for him. That's plausible too. I don't think so. I think Ecbert is smart enough, and I think he is a visionary in the sense that he's always taking into consideration the broader picture, the bigger picture, the broader scope. So if he thinks he can use Ragnar to benefit his own agenda, he's gonna do it. Less manpower. I will, final note on that, also how Ethelstan will play in that will be very interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we find this sort of situation where Ragnar and Ethelstan are on opposite ends. You know what I mean? If that sort of in terms of negotiation and whatnot, if their goals have now differed to the point of no resolution. You know what I mean? So we'll see how that whole thing pans out. Hopefully that will come to a head before the season's over with. I'm hoping to get to see something with that within the next 2 episodes, because I think, let's see, this is episode 7, and I think this is going to have 10 episodes this season. So we'll see. Alright, now let's talk about this internal conflict that has suddenly arisen within Kattegat in this episode. And this is what I mean. We've already known about Horik and Siggy conspiring with each other against Ragnar. We knew that. And we learned in last week's episode that Floki picked up on it too. But now we find out in this week's episode that apparently Floki has a beef with Ragnar, and I don't know where that's stemming from. We do know that in the scene with him and Helga, he said that Ragnar has everything, so why should he partake in our happiness? He was talking about, the fact that now Helga's pregnant, so Loki's going to be a father, and they decided to get married. So yeah, his whole thing is, why should Ragnar have a part in this when he has everything else? And to me, that scene doesn't paint Floki necessarily to be jealous or petty or spiteful or anything like that. It doesn't come across like that. It's not the same sort of resentment that Rollo had for Ragnar for a season and a half. No. I think with Floki, it might boil down more to just being he wants things to go back to the way they were. I mean, let's face it, if you go back to season 1, Floki and Ragnar were real good friends. I mean, Floki built Ragnar's ships, always had his best interest in heart, always got his pick of the prize whenever they raided, and then in turn, when Earl Haraldson moved against Ragnar, what safe haven did they go to? Floki. Who helped save Ragnar's life, nurse him back to health? Floki. Who helped battle off the ambush when Haraldson attacked Ragnar's home? Floki. So I think that is what it has more to do with. Going back to the way things were, because Ragnar's Earl now. Ragnar's family fell apart because he decided to shack up with Princess Aslog, and because Lagertha divorced him, and Bjorn left, and all that type of stuff. The separation between him and Rollo that lasted over the time lapse and everything. Floki's had to bear witness to all this, and before Ragnar was in power, none of this was an issue. So I think that's where he's more concerned with. And it was no surprise whatsoever that Siggy picked up on that and told Horik about it, and that Horik's trying to, we saw in the preview for next week's episode, he's trying to use that to his advantage, try to get Floki over to his side, which I don't think Floki will go for that. I mean, as pissed off as he may be with Ragnar, he doesn't seem like the backstabbing type. He doesn't seem like the betrayer type. Because remember, that was Floki's main beef with Rollo in the first half of this season. The fact that Rollo fought with Jarl Borg in the premiere, and Floki pretty much put Rollo on his shit list forever because of that. So I don't think that Floki will just immediately, turn against Ragnar like that. If anything, I would say that a huge falling out would have to occur before anything like that happened. Like there would have to be some type of argument or fight between him and Ragnar. And also in that same vein, I'm starting to wonder what role Rollo will play in that whole thing, because now we got the confirmation in this week's episode. He knows that Siggy's been sleeping with Horik. He knows that they're up to something, and I do believe, or at least it's suggested by the way that scene ended, that Siggy kind of filled Rollo in on what's going on. So I'm almost positive he at least knows. He's at least aware of what's going on. But only time will tell if he decides to act on it, if he decides to get engaged in that. Who knows? Rollo might just decide to stay in the background and just let nature take its course. Just let the things happen the way they happen, and try to pick up from the fallout. That's plausible too. But I do want to talk about this though, and I'm just going to go ahead and segue the rest of this review into my discussion about Ragnar. I think Ragnar at least is suspicious now. The whole scene with him standing behind the little crate and whatnot, and just seeing how everyone interacts with each other and whatnot. You can't tell me that Ragnar isn't at least suspicious. You know what I mean? Hell, even Rollo asked Ragnar, why is it that you keep making your decisions based off of what King Horik does? Why are you catering to him if you don't agree with it yourself? And Ragnar told him, because he is a king. You have to take that into consideration. And it's funny because the same thing is echoed when Siggy talks to Rollo. When Rollo asked her the same thing. Why are you doing what you're doing? And she says, because he is a king. You can't ignore that fact. His power is pretty significant. But like I said, I have to think that Ragnar is at least suspicious, and that he at least, has eyes planted in the back of his head now. But who knows? I mean, the fact that Lagertha is back into the picture, she's an Earl now, which I must say I was not expecting that. I did not expect for her to take over her husband's village. I wasn't. I thought that one of the other men were going to take it over, and she was more or less just sort of step down, if you were. Now, yeah, that's pretty much it. That was pretty much it. I didn't necessarily think that she was immediately going to return to Kattegat. That I didn't think that at all. And I wasn't sure that she was just going to marry the next guy who would become Earl either. I didn't think that at all either. But the fact that she is Earl, that she took over, you know, everything, and that she's the one calling the shots with her people. I mean, I'm sorry, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and you can tell from Ragnar's expression that's not common. And it's been suggested many times from what we've seen, from what we've heard, from the way it's discussed in the series. Female leaders aren't common amongst the Vikings. Not really. You have some, but not many. So, but anyway, but the point I'm getting at with bringing Lagertha up is that I could very easily see, going back to Ragnar's suspicion, I could very easily see him possibly becoming too comfortable, sort of relying on his familiarity with those around him a bit too much, because now he does have an ally, someone that he knows, someone that he trusts, someone that will be there to guard his back whenever the shit inevitably hits the fan. So who knows? But once again, this is another thing that I'm hoping we'll see wrapped up by the end of the season. And so finally, I'm just going to give my thoughts on the whole Blood Eagle execution. Now, although I was a bit disappointed that was the big shocker for the episode, I will say that the scene still works. It works on multiple levels. First off, what we're told and what we see. Once again, going back to at the beginning of this review where I mentioned giving a network, giving their status on television, there's only so much that they can actually show, you know, due to ratings and whatnot. So the fact that we are told in explicit detail in the scene with Ragnar and Bjorn what is the Blood Eagle execution, how it's conducted, what are the steps that take place. We're told all that information before it ever happens, so that when the scene finally does happen and there are certain parts that we don't get to see, you know, we don't actually see Ragnar, you know, dig into his back and, you know, pull out the lungs and things of that nature. It's suggested, but we don't see the brutality, you know what I mean, from a point of view standpoint. So the fact that we're given that information ahead of time allows us as the audience to use our imagination for each part. And remember how they did it too. We were told first it starts with the knife, then it starts with the axe, then it ends with the lungs. It's a 3-part execution. So we saw that every time Ragnar went to a next step of the execution, we could then use our imagination to fill in those blanks, and that's how the scene worked. Kudos to the writers, kudos to the cinematographers for the execution of that scene, because it works in that format. Another thing, the visual imagery, you know, the symbolism, you know, with Jarl Borg and Ragnar seeing the eagle and all that, that worked really well. The music, really well done. Hell, I even loved the crowd's reaction to the execution. You know, we saw Floki, we saw Helga, we saw Jarl Borg's wife, we saw Bjorn, we saw Horik, we saw Sigurd, we saw Rollo, we saw Lagertha, we saw all the main characters, Thorstein even, we saw all of them sort of react differently to the execution. And that just goes to show like how gruesome it actually was, because you're talking about some brutal warriors who even cringed at the sight of this. So yeah, all in all, I thought worked fantastically. So that pretty much wraps up my episode 7 review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week, and in the comments below, please leave your thoughts on this week's episode and let me know what you guys think about the preview for next week's episode. How do you think the whole bit with Horik's plan with Floki is going to pan out? How do you guys think about the alliance in England? Where do you think that is going to, where that's going? And And yeah, and just pretty much all the questions I brought up in this review. You know, how is you know, the internal conflict going on in Kattegat? What would Ragnar? Oh God, don't even. I just remember the shit with Princess Aslaug, the creepiness of this woman. I'm sorry. Every episode, it's something creepy with this woman. I can't take it anymore. Seriously, I can't. So yeah, please leave all your thoughts in the comments below. And with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, signing off. And until next time, peace.